My Brother Sam is Dead, Chapter 11. Dr. Hobart saddled up and rode down to the tavern, and I walked back slowly. There wasn't much hurry now. Mostly I tried to put out of my mind what I'd seen. I went out to the barn and cleaned myself up the best I could, and then I went out into the tap room. It was full of people who had come to talk about the British raid. The wounded man was still alive. The ball hit him high in the ribs, and he had stuck there without damaging him much. Dr. Hobart gave him a huge mug of rum, and when he drunk that down and it had its chance to work, 4 men held the man down flat on the table while Dr. Hobart sliced open the wound and pulled the ball out of it with his forceps. "A couple broken ribs," he said, "but it'll knit." He bound the man tightly, and we propped him up with some comforters in the front of the fire and gave him some more rum and something to eat. He was pretty drunk, but he told us his story. "They're after the munitions stored in Danbury," he said. "I came up here to warn the militia. We thought somebody might stop them, but I was too late." Dr. Hobart shook his head. "A wasted errand," he said, "and the train band is here. Here is pretty thin." "I know," the wounded man said, "but we were expecting some Continental troops. They've heard of General Benedict Arnold, or you've heard of General Benedict Arnold, I expect. He and General Silliman and some others have been chasing the British up from Campo and Fairfield. They were hoping somebody would slow them down until they would catch up, although I don't know what good it would do. They haven't got the men to take on a bunch of lobsterbacks." I took a deep breath. Sam was with Benedict Arnold's troops, or at least he had been. "Sir, you mean General Arnold's troops are coming through Reading?" "That was the plan. Of course, you can't tell what's going to happen in the war. A lot of things change." I knew it was foolish to believe that Sam might be with General Arnold's troops, but when you want something bad enough that you can't stop yourself from hoping. I wondered if Mother remembered that Sam was with Arnold. I didn't think she would. She wouldn't have paid attention to something like that. I went to the window and looked out. It had clouded over and was beginning to rain. A man was running around across the training ground. In a moment, I saw that it was Captain Betts. He came swiftly towards the tavern, opened the doors, and came in. "Stephen," somebody said, "you escaped?" "They let some of us go," he said. "How many?" "9. They let most of us go. They only kept 3. Is Jerry Sanford all right, sir?" He shook his head. "They kept him. Don't ask me why they kept a boy." "They kept Jerry? What will they do with him, sir?" "I don't know," he said gruffly. "What's happened here?" "They've gone off north towards Danbury," somebody told him. "They burnt Starr's house and killed some people there." "Dan Starr? They killed Dan Starr?" "Yes." Captain Betts looked grim and hard. "The bastards! We can still catch them. I'm going to get the train band out. We'll follow them through the fields and cut them down from behind the wall. Tim, go over and ring the church bell. Get cracking." I didn't want to get into it, but I had to obey. I started towards the door, but my mother grabbed my collar. No, she said. "Not my boy. You don't involve any Meekers in this terrible war. Send your own children out to play soldier if you want, Stephen Betts, but no more of mine." Betts stared at Mother. "Where's your patriotism, woman?" "Bah! Patriotism. You and your patriotism has got my husband in prison and one of my children out there in the rain and the muck shooting people likely to be dead any minute. And my business is half ruined. Go sell your patriotism elsewhere. I've had enough of it." "They're killing our neighbors, Susanna," Captain Betts shouted. "They've killed Dan Starr." "Then there's enough dead already." "Tim," he started. Mother snatched up the poker from the fireplace. "Leave my boy alone, Stephen Betts," she said. She raised the poker over her head, and I knew from the mad look in her eye that she would hit Captain Betts if she had to. "Mother," I said. "The devil on you," Betts said. "I can't fool with you any longer." Then he turned and strode out of the tavern, banging the door behind him. A few minutes later, the church bell began to toll an alarm. The people in the tavern began to leave. Some of them I knew belonged to the train band and were going off to get their weapons. A lot of others just smelled trouble and wanted to get clear of it. Pretty soon, there were only a couple men left. The wounded man had fallen asleep by the fire. Outside, the wind began to blow and the rain against the windows, and night was falling. Mother sat down at the table and put her head in her hands. "Timothy, I want to pray. Come here and pray with me." She took my hand and pulled me down on the bench beside her. I put my head down. "Oh, Lord," she said, "please take this war away from here. What have we done to endure this? Why must it go on so long? What have we done in thy sight to deserve this evil?" She stopped, but there was no answer, and then after a moment she raised her eyes, got up, and began to slice some onions into the stew pot for supper. An hour later, as I was getting hungry and wondering when supper would be ready, we heard distant sounds again, the sounds of marching men and horses trotting and orders being shouted. I looked at Mother. The wounded man by the fire raised his eyes. "They're coming back again," he said. "Maybe it's the train band," I said, but my heart was pounding, and I knew who I hoped it was. I ran out into the yard, and it was nearly full dark, and the rain splattered against the squalls against my face. I looked down the Fairfield road. It was hard to make out much, but indistinctly I could see a body of men coming towards us. I pulled back into the shadow of the house, and I watched them come up. After a while I began to make out the shapes of the ones on horseback. I could tell by their hats that they were redcoats. I darted up into the tavern. That they weren't redcoats. I darted into the tavern. "They're Continentals," I said. "Thank God," the wounded man said. Mother and I went to the window. The troops marched by, then broke formation and began to spread out through the village, looking for shelter from the rain. A lot of them went into the church or Mr. Huron's barn out behind. Then the tavern door banged open, and 4 or 5 men strode in. Leading them was a general, wearing a long blue continental coat and cockeyed hat with feathers in it. He said nothing to us, but dropped down at the table. The asides stood around him. "Rum for the General Wooster boy," one of the aides said, and then he looked at Mother. "Your tavern, ma'am?" "Yes, sir." "We'll need some dinner." There went my stew. I didn't care. General David Wooster was the head of the Connecticut militia. I've never seen a general up close before, and as I brought the rum and water, I looked him over. I was disappointed. He wasn't very glorious looking, just a tired old man who was worried and frowning. As I stared, he yawned and rubbed his eyes. "Timothy," Mother snapped, "bring the gentlemen their dinners." Suddenly the wounded man began to struggle to his feet and saluted. "Who are you?" General Wooster said. "Private Hodge, sir. I took the British ball after this afternoon." "They were here, then?" "Yes, sir. They've gone down towards Danbury about 8 hours ago." General Wooster ran his hand across his eyes. 8 hours, he said softly. "Damn." He took his hand off his eyes. "Sit down, sir," he said. "Was there any attempt made to stop them?" The wounded man struggled to the floor. "No, sir, not that I could see." I stepped forward. "Sir, some of the train band fired on them from the house just down the road. The redcoats killed them all and burned Starr's house." I remembered Ned's head jumping off his shoulders. "How many men in the house, son?" "I don't know, sir. Maybe 5 or 6. Suddenly the door banged open again. Another Continental officer stood there gazing around the room. Then he walked in, followed by his aides, and crossed the room to General Wooster. In a moment I saw the insignia on his shoulder. He was a general, too. He walked over to General Wooster, followed by his aides. General Wooster got up. "Ben," he said, "it's good to see you. Boy, a glass of rum for General Arnold." So, General Arnold was in Reading. I brought the rum and the water and some bread, and we scraped out the bottom of the stew pot to feed General Arnold and his aides. As they ate, they talked, and I stood back, ready to serve, and listened. They talked about the routes and the marching orders and the other military things that I did not understand. Twice they mentioned William Herring in an unfriendly way, or in a friendly way. I thought that was strange, but I didn't worry about it much because I couldn't get it out of my mind that right at that moment Sam might be in Reading somewhere. But what was I going to do about it? Of course, he didn't know that Father was gone, and it worried me that he might be afraid to come home. Then there was the other side of it, which was that the chances were that Sam wasn't in General Arnold's troops anymore and probably was 100 miles away from Reading. I knew I was being foolish, but I couldn't help myself. After a bit, I said, "Mother, I'd better go out and see the livestock." "All right," she said, "but don't be long. I may need you here to help with the gentleman." I went through the kitchen and out to the barnyard, and then I went around front. It was dark out, and the rain was spitting against me, soaking my face. Across the road, some troops stood in the church doorway, smoking pipes. I crossed over. A soldier barred my way. "I'm looking for Sam Meeker," I said. "Is he here?" "Who are you?" "I'm his brother." "You better get an order from the officer." My heart jumped. "Is Sam here?" "You better go find an officer," he insisted. Another soldier turned to us. "Don't make such a fuss. Let him go." "This is Tory country. I don't trust any of them." "Oh, come on. The boy's not lying. Sam's from around here somewhere. I know that." Get him yourself then, the first soldier said. I don't want to be any part of it. Wait here, the other one said. I'll see if I can go find Sam. He went in, leaving the church door open. I could see the soldiers sprawled out in the pews, lying in the aisles and trying to sleep. Some of them were drinking from their canteens or chewing on some hard loaves of bread. The ones who wanted to smoke had to come to the door because it wasn't right to smoke in a church. They were a ragged-looking lot of men, their clothing dirty and torn, and most of them not even having proper uniforms. They needed shaves, and their hair was wild and uncombed. I saw the soldier work his way through the crowd, looking around. I saw him bend down and touch somebody, and then Sam was coming up the aisle towards me. He looked older and raggedy too. He hadn't shaved either. He got to the door. For a moment we stared at each other, and then he put his arm around me and hugged me, and I hugged him back. Timmy, he said. I couldn't say anything. It felt so good to hug him I began to cry. Then he began to cry too, and we stood there in the church door, hugging each other and crying all over ourselves. After a couple of minutes we started feeling foolish, crying that way in front of the soldiers, and we stopped hugging. I wanted to come over and see you, he said, but I didn't know if you all hated me. Hated you? I thought you might. Sam, Father's... I know, he said. That's why I thought you might not want to see me. I didn't know what to do. How did you know about Father? I asked. The commissary officer found out that I know about dealing in cattle. I've been working with them a lot, looking for beef, and I met somebody from Salem who heard about what happened to Father. I think he got it from the Platts. He touched my shoulder. How's Mother? She's not mad at you either. None of us are. Let's go over there, he said. I haven't been home in 2 years. Who's in the tavern? The generals. Then I'll have to stay in the barn. I'm not supposed to leave my company. Wait, I'll tell somebody where I'm going just in case they want me. He went into the church. In a moment he was back, and we ducked across the road, through the rain, and behind the house to the barn. I lit a lantern. You've changed, Tim. I'm more of a grown-up now. I can see that. Has it been hard on you and Mother? We even have to work on Sundays, I said. Sam, what have they done with our father? He sucked in a mouthful of air. I don't know. Put him in prison, probably. But why? He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't a real Tory. He's just against the war. He's selling beef to the British. No, he wasn't. He was selling beef to Mr. Borgadas. He didn't care who bought it. What difference does it make? It was getting to the British. It comes down to the same thing. He was selling the beef to the enemy. Are you against Father, Sam? No, but Father's against me. You ran away, I said. He told me to leave. I didn't want to fight with him, but he threw me out. He cried when you left, I said. I know. You told me that before. Don't think I was happy about leaving. I felt terrible. I remember running down the road in the rain and being mad and cursing for him for what he did. But all that while I was cursing, I kept remembering things like our trips over to Verplank's Point and him taking me down to New Haven and getting admitted into Yale and buying me new clothes there and everything else. And I finally stopped cursing. And I just felt terrible and I wished we hadn't fought. But it was too late. That's 2 years ago, Tim. Don't you feel bad about Father being in prison, Sam? Yes. He didn't say anything for a minute. As a matter of fact, I thought I might be able to get him out. I even went to see General Arnold about it, but I couldn't even find out where he was. Nobody knows. Well, maybe you could try again. Tim, I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm too tired. He was tired, all right. Can't you write somebody a letter? Tim, I don't want to argue about it anymore. I'll stop arguing if you promise to get Father out. I can't get him out. I tried. But you can try again, I said. For God's sakes, Tim. I shut up. I didn't want to spoil it by having a fight. We stared at each other for a minute, and then he said, Can you get me something to eat? I'll tell Mother you're here. I slipped across the barnyard, through the kitchen, and into the tavern. The generals and their aides had finished eating and were drinking the rum and water and talking over their plans. Mother gave me a cross look. Where have you been? There's something wrong with old Prue's leg. I think you better come out and look at it. It'll have to wait, Mother said. I think you ought to come look at it now, Mother. It wasn't like me to insist on anything, and that way, and she got the idea. All right, just a moment, she said. I'll see if the gentlemen need more rum. I filled the glasses and I helped her clear the plates, and then we went out through the kitchen to the barnyard. What's happened, Tim? Sam's in the barn. Mom stopped dead. Sam's here? That's where I've been. I was looking for him. I thought he might be here with General Arnold. She started to run, but then she thought better of it and walked steadily out there. When Sam saw her, he came out a little out of the He came a little way out of the barn shadows. For a moment he and Mother stared at each other, and then began to hug. I came up and put my arms around both of them and hugged them together. Then Mother pushed back and stared at him. "I haven't seen you in 2 years, Sam," she said. He grinned. "Do I look different?" "Dirtier," she said. He laughed. "Is that all?" "No, older," she said. "You've gotten older. Tim has too. I hardly recognized him." "He had to grow up fast," Mother said. "He didn't have much of a choice." "I thought you'd all be mad at me," he said. "I didn't know if you'd be speaking to me." "Oh, we're willing to speak to you, all right," she said. "We need you back home." "Hey, Tim, I thought you were going to bring me something to eat." He was trying to change the subject. "I forgot," I said. "Tim, get your brother some bread and a piece of ham that's hanging in the kitchen." I went back to the kitchen and got the food. I knew they were going to have an argument. When I got back to the barn, Mother was saying, "Sam, we don't even know if he's alive. You have to come home now. We need you." That was the first time I'd ever heard her admit that Father might be dead. Sam winced. It hurt him. "I don't think he's dead, Mother." I handed him his food. "Oh, lovely," he said. "Thanks." He tore off a piece of ham with his teeth and then stuffed a hunk of bread in his mouth. I said, "Is that the way they teach you to eat in the army?" I knew it wasn't going to do any good to argue with Sam, but he wasn't going to change his mind. He didn't want Mother to have a fight with him. He swallowed. "I guess we figure if we're lucky enough to have something to eat, we don't care how we eat it." But Mother wouldn't give up. "Sam, you have to come home. We need you. Your people have taken Father from us. They'll have to give us you in return." "Mother, I can't come home. That's desertion, and people are hung for that." "When's your enlistment up, Sam?" He frowned. "In 2 months, but I'm going to re-enlist." "No, Sam, you have to come home." "Mother," I said, "don't argue with him. You can't make him change his mind." "He's just being stubborn," she said. "God, Mother," he said, "I came to pay a visit, and first Tim badgered me about Father, and now you're badgering me about coming home. I can't come home until it's over. It's my duty to stay and fight." "You have a duty to your family, too." "My duty to my country comes first. Now please, everybody, stop arguing with me." "And get killed in the meantime?" she said. "Maybe," he said. We were all quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We've made a promise, a group of us, not to quit until the redcoats are beaten. We've made a pledge to each other." "Oh, Sam, that's a foolish promise." I said, "Mother, stop arguing with him." "You're both fools," she said. He was getting angry. "For God's sakes, Mother, people are out there dying for you." "Well, they can stop dying," Mother said. "I don't need anybody's death." "Let him alone, Mother," I said. "He isn't going to change his mind." We were all silent, and I knew she was trying to accept it. "All right," she said finally, "all right." We changed the subject, and we talked about the crops and the people, and he gave us a message to take to Betsy Reed. "We'll probably be moving out soon," he said. "I don't know. Tell her I'll try to see her if I can." He paused for a minute. "I better go now before somebody misses me." He hugged Mother and hugged me, and turned and slipped through the rain and the night out of the barnyard. We watched him go, knowing that we might never see him again. Then we went back into the tavern. I had a funny feeling about seeing Sam. It wasn't that he was more of a grown-up or that I was more of a grown-up. It was something else. For the first time in my life, I knew that Sam was wrong about something. I knew that, and I understood something better than he did. Oh, I used to argue with him before, but that was mostly to show that I wasn't just going to agree with everything he said. But this time I knew he was wrong. He was staying in the army because he wanted to stay in the army, not because of a duty or anything else. He liked the excitement of it. Oh, I guessed he was miserable a lot of the time when he was cold and hungry and maybe being shot at, but still, he was part of something big. He thought that what he was doing was important. It felt good to be a part of it, and I knew that was the real reason why he didn't want to come home. Knowing that about Sam gave me a funny feeling. I didn't feel like his little brother so much anymore. I felt more like his equal.